Hi, everybody. Today is Tuesday, August 19th, 2025, and our friends Pepe, Escobar, and Professor Marandi are back with us. Welcome back.
Well, I
Thank you,
am in
Nima.
front of the two coolest persons in the history of humanity. So I am just a humble servant right here in Normandy, where I am 20 minutes away from the Normandy landing. And there's not going to be another one, ladies and gentlemen, because this time the Americans are not coming.
Well, I'm with the two coolest Brazilians too, and I'm here in Tianjin in China. And the Chinese are not going anywhere.
Except the SEO summit.
That's right.
Exactly. Let's get started, Pepe, with you and the meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. What was your take? What did you take? What was the sense coming? What was the outcome of the meeting? The way that Russian media is perceiving that, the way that the United States is talking about it. Your take on that?
Absolutely. It's a pity that you can you go to the cradle, Nima, and put on the screen my column that came out yesterday night, Beirut time, I think, very late.
Yeah.
And this will be interesting for our audience because that's the concise version of what happened in Alaska. So basically, the key, and that includes feedback that I got from our Russian contacts in Moscow. Many of them very closely connected with the table in Alaska. Not only the three on the table, of course, Putin, Lavrov, and Yuri Ushakov, but the ultra high level delegation around it, which included Silvanov, the Minister of Finance, included Belousov, the Minister of Defense, and Kirill Dmitriev, the head of the Russian Direct Investment Council. So they sent a dream team. Why would Russia send a dream team to Alaska? It's because beforehand, they had assurances from the Americans, which obviously were secret, as most of what they agreed in Moscow is secret, that something substantive would come out of this meeting. You cannot even imagine the Russian Security Council and Vladimir Putin going on a very risky trip to Alaska with a dream team, high-tech, high-power delegation for nothing, just so Lavrov could exhibit his absolutely outstanding white CCCP sweatshirt. No, that's not enough. So there was much more behind it. So you can tell it's important because there were no substantial leaks about it before, during, and after. But what well-placed people in Moscow were allowed to comment, including relaying to some of us analysts and foreign analysts, was that apparently Trump finally understood that if the US continues to weaponize Ukraine, there's absolutely no chance even to start a negotiation. Very, very important. And the other thing is that both sides seem to have agreed that the responsibility from now on for prosecuting the war is with the Europeans, or what I decided to call, considering the meeting yesterday in Washington, the coalition of the twats, which is a much more joyful way of talking about the coalition of the impotent, which is what they are essentially, right? Or taking a leaf from our friend George Galloway, Snow White and the Seven Flying Dwarfs, also impeccable. So this is what was taking place yesterday in Washington. We knew that the backlash from the Europeans would be immediate. They were desperate to talk to Trump immediately after the meeting with Putin because they saw that real progress was made in terms of Trump maybe finally starting to understand a little bit of the big picture. Like, we were discussing with some of our Russian friends that if Lavrov had 10 minutes at the table to explain to Trump the genesis of Maidan and then what led to the SMO, he's the only person on the planet who could explain that to Trump in 10 minutes and make Trump understand at least 5% of it. You see? And Lavrov speaks fluent English, which is even better. He could explain this to Trump in English, straight up. So, yes, things changed, of course. But at the same time, and I'm dying to hear Mohammed's point of view about that. There are two plan Bs as well already set up on the Trump side and on the Putin side. Putin's plan B would be, okay, if this goes to nowhere, we'll continue to do what we do, which is our attrition war. And next time is not going to be discussing for Ukrainian regions. It's going to be 6, 7, 8, or even more. And on the Trump side, it's much more complicated because it's quite schizophrenic. All right. Showing, like I just showed on Monday in Washington to these twats, that now it's your war. So you continue the forever war against Russia, buying our very expensive weapons and paying in euros that you don't have, but that's your problem, it's not my problem. And Europeans have to, at the same time, weaponize and finance Ukraine. Everybody knows that they cannot do both. If they try to do both, the EU and NATO combo together will collapse even faster than it's already collapsing. So Trump's plan B is, okay, if I cannot win my Nobel Peace Prize by putting them on the same table and trying to find an arrangement, it's the ball is in the European court, and I still can get my Nobel Peace Prize, and we're out of it, and we can concentrate on our next war, which is against China. So this is the short version of what happened between Alaska and Washington.
Yeah. Professor Marandi, your take on backup plan or plan B, how did you find it, by the way, the meeting?
Well, with hindsight, it's easier to analyze. But before the meeting, I think there were some people who were saying that there must be some sort of agreement because two presidents, and especially from the United States and Russia now, if they meet and don't have an agenda and if they don't have a serious chance for some success, that would be very bad news for the world. So I think many did guess that there would probably be some success, but not a ceasefire or a peace deal. And I think that it was successful in that President Putin got what he wanted. He won. He was Russia won for a host of reasons that I think we all know quite well. And the United States did not win, but Trump personally probably, I would say that he won. Although if he had done this 6 months ago when he promised and after the election, if he had done it back then, this would have been a huge achievement for him. But I think he's lost his momentum. And back then, if he had done it, he would have had people behind him. No one could have stood in his way. But now we've seen how the media, has even Fox News, they were aghast and they were outraged and angry about the relationship and how President Putin was being treated. 6 months ago, this would not have happened, I believe. And so I'm not sure how much of a success this is for Trump. And Trump being the sort of unpredictable person that we all know him to be, it's unclear if he's going to follow through. So I agree with Pepe that the two most likely courses or routes are that either this fails, the Europeans go after further confrontation, and there is going to be no more negotiations until Ukraine collapses, or that there will be some sort of agreement. Either way, the United States is not going to be involved anymore. That's probably, I mean, involved in the sense that they're not going to be paying for this, for the confrontation. But I think that if the war does continue, it is going to weaken the United States. because Trump is going to be seen as weak. If he fails to rein in the Europeans, if he fails to bring an end to this war, then that just shows that he is incapable, that he does not have clout, that he is weak at home and abroad. So the only way for this success of Trump to extend itself is for this war to wind down. But I find it very difficult for it to go in that direction because the Europeans, they are conspiring against peace. The deep state in the United States, the neocons, and we know that the neocons and the Zionists are more or less one and the same. In fact, the neocons are the fathers of the neocon movement are Zionists. So they are hell bent on pushing this war. If Trump is not firm, I see this war as continuing, and then the Russians are going to push forward, and either Trump will admit failure at a time when the Epstein files are being discussed, and when Congress and the Senate reconvene, this is going to be a big issue. It's going to go downhill for Trump very rapidly, in my opinion. And then you have our region, you have China, you have the growing economic problems at home in the United States, which few people are talking about, but a lot of people who know what they're talking about say that the situation is going to get worse. So if Trump fails, I think that his presidency will have failed. And I don't know if he can bring an end to this, but I find it, at least at this stage, very unlikely. The language coming out of Europe and Zelensky doesn't seem to indicate that Trump is going to get his way. And by the way, I should point out, sitting here in China, that I think that the Chinese and the Iranians are looking at the situation very closely. And that on the one hand, the Chinese and the Iranians speak about, hope for peace and an end to the conflict, and I'm sure that they're I hope that everyone is sincere about having peace and an end to the bloodshed. I think the Iranians are, but I don't know the Chinese that well, but I'm pretty sure that I know that the Iranians and the Chinese are concerned about what sort of rapprochement is possible between the United States and Russia. Although at the same time, I don't think it's going the bridges that Trump and Putin may be trying to build will be built that easily, and that they can really go that far, because the United States is excellent at imposing sanctions, but the United States is terrible at removing sanctions. And I don't think that normalization with Russia is going to be easy at all. When the ANC and Nelson Mandela were sanctioned by the United States for being terrorists, according to the United States, afterwards, when Nelson Mandela was freed and the ANC senior leadership, they were all freed from prison in South Africa, they were still terrorists according to US law. And then when President Mandela came to power and the ANC came to power, they were still terrorists. And it was only years after President Mandela retired from politics that the ANC and he were removed from the sanctions regime or the sanctions apparatus in Washington. So I don't think that there's going to be that sort of rapprochement between Russia and the United States, especially since Russia is despised by the political establishment. But the Iranians and the Chinese are looking on, I think, with some concern. But I'm as I said, I'm somewhat skeptical about how far this is going to go.
Yeah. Pepe, when it comes to the meeting between Europeans together with Zelensky on one side and the Trump administration on the other side, what does Europe want from Donald Trump? They're talking about security guarantees. They're talking about, even Merz was talking about ceasefire. He was insisting on ceasefire. I don't see, because Donald Trump didn't talk about ceasefire. It seems that he somehow forgot about what he was asking for before.
Ceasefire is dead for Trump, absolutely, and he made that clear since since Friday. And in one of his true social posts, probably the most significant after the meeting, where he said, no, a ceasefire can be broken by both sides. We think we should go straight for a peace agreement, in caps, as he posted it. So in his mind, he already made up his mind about no ceasefire. Obviously, you can imagine the coalition of the twats, especially MERS. They freaked out completely because they have been pushing for the ceasefire for weeks, if not months, right? It's done. It's over. So what does Europe do now? They have nothing. They have no weapons. They have no money. They still need to secure the weapons that even the US does not have. Secure the funds to buy these weapons, make agreements with the banks to pay these weapons and roll over their debt. So this could take months as well. So at the moment, they have nothing to offer Ukraine practically, apart from what the BRICS and MI6 does, terror attacks. So expect the proliferation of terror attacks, MI6 organized in the next weeks, and if that's the case, months. It's not by accident that you have NATO planes overflying Crimea on a daily basis for weeks now. So this is very serious. And the desperation, when they look at a real good cartography of where the war is now, with the imminent fall of Pokrovsk and all those plains in the steppes to the west, all the way to Dnieper, are totally open for a Russian advance. Can you imagine? The morale among the Ukrainian armed forces is already the lowest in these past 3 years, and the morale in NATO as well, because they have absolutely nothing to counteract what can be. It's up to the Russians to decide. Do we go for a blitzkrieg? Do we keep doing the chameleon stuff? Do we keep getting one village a week? It's up to the ball is in the Russian court. They can do anything they want during the summer. So, and the front may collapse entirely within the next 1 to 2 months. So it's really the coalition of the impotent. We may be joking about it, but it's a perfectly apt definition. The strategic defeat now is staring in front of them like the Nietzschean abyss. I'm looking at the abyss, and the abyss is looking back at me. Well, this is the strategic defeat abyss looking back at you, Europeans. And that was the subtext of that spectacular scene of Trump sitting in the headmaster ritual chair. And, of course, the coalition of 7 dwarfs and the flying the Snow White and the 7 dwarfs, like this, expecting to be reprimanded in style. Wow, this is one of the greatest pictures of the 21st century. I think with this picture, you explain how Europe geopolitically and geoeconomically, for that matter, suicided itself. Geoeconomically, they suicided themselves with China. Mohammad is in China, and I'm sure you are talking about this with your Chinese colleagues. And they suicided themselves politically and militarily by pointing on a war that they knew would be lost sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Professor Marandi, you're looking at Europeans, they're talking about the European allies. Do you see allies in that picture, in those pictures that they've shown?
Well, it's interesting what Pepe said about here in China. Before this, we had a panel discussion, and the invitation was for the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And I actually mentioned this picture. And I said the difference between the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and NATO right now, I mean, the differences are infinite because this is not an alliance. It's a. Mm-hmm. But what I did point out was that if you look at this picture, it clearly shows the difference between the countries, the member states of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, what the images that we'll be seeing in a couple of weeks, and the situation in the West. In the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, you have major powers and you have regional powers and you have other countries. They'll be sitting around at the table, and they will be they'll all have an equal status at that table. Yet in the West, you have this schoolmaster, as Pepe said, and these brats sitting on the other side of the desk. And that's basically where things stand now. That the West has become an entity where the schoolmaster is Trump. The sane person right now is Trump. Imagine how insane it is when he is the voice of sanity. And then you have these fools who are only going to make their situation much worse. But it's interesting that they went there to sort of push Trump to rethink, to continue business as usual. But the images coming out of the White House they're images of humiliation for the Europeans. Why should Iran take the Europeans seriously in future when they're sitting like that? I don't know if you recall, I think it was the president of Serbia who once, during Trump, his first presidency, he went to the Oval Office and they forced him to sit in front of Trump it was very humiliating. But now you see all these leaders, European leaders, and Zelensky sitting on one side of the table. For them to accept such a situation shows how weak and desperate and ineffective they are. So why should Iran, why should Russia, why should China, why should any global power, why should the Indians or the Brazilians take the Europeans seriously when all of them combined are like a bunch of school brats sitting in front of the principal's desk? And at a time when they were actually going to the White House to force the U.S. or Trump, the U.S. president, to change his position. Is this how they do it? Is this how they show their clout? But also, I think it also doesn't bode well for Trump ultimately, because if Trump does not impose a peace in the coming days and weeks, and I think that's almost impossible as things stand, then that means Trump cannot even manage these brats. That means that the United States has no control over Europe. So how is the United States going to control India? How is it going to control West Asia? How is it going to control Latin America? I think the symbolism in this picture goes far beyond the seven dwarfs. I think it says a lot about, well, I can't call him Snow White. I don't know what to call him. But it says a lot about the United States as well. Because ultimately, if Trump is able to impose a peace, yes, then this makes sense. He is the powerful leader of the dwarves, and the U.S. hegemony still means something. But if he's not able to do it, and it doesn't seem that that's going to happen, the Russians are talking about the rights of Russian speakers, that they have to be acknowledged. As Ukraine going, this is not just about territory. This is not just about NATO. This is not just about neutrality. This is about Ukrainian society itself and how it's going to function tomorrow. The Russian language is banned. And so does anyone seriously think that these neo-Nazis or these fascists or these extreme right-wingers, whatever one wants to call them, they are going to lose territory? And they're also going to lose their domination over Russian speakers? I don't see that happening without a civil war inside Ukraine itself. So, however, the way I see it, this is going to diminish both Trump and the Europeans. The Europeans, of course, more than the United States. But I think if Trump does not get his way, if he does not have a peace, then the United States is diminished. I don't mean that diminish in the sense that it's no longer a force to reckon with, but I think that it's after the meeting that he had. I mean, I'm sure that they were discussing bilateral relations. I'm sure the 20 minutes when they were sitting together in the car, a lot of significant things were said, and I'm sure in the 2 hours and what was it, 150
150 minutes.
150 minutes or so of discussions, and the discussions before and afterwards, all of that had significance. But at the end of the day, what the world is looking at is Ukraine. And so if Trump cannot manage Zelensky, and if he cannot manage these dwarves, then his presidency has failed and the United States has failed.
Pepe, we've learned that during the meeting, Donald Trump called Vladimir Putin. They talked for 40 minutes, it seems, as today during the meeting between Trump and Europeans. He suddenly, I don't know what has happened during the meeting.
He said that he did not call to Putin during the meeting. It was after. This is what
it was after the meeting.
He says it was after the meeting. We don't have a conclusive information about that yet.
Yeah, but what is the crucial point on Ukraine? Professor Marandi said the complexity of what's going on in Ukraine.
Just one thing before you continue. Can you imagine? I mean, I think it's probably right that it came after the meeting. But can you imagine these brats, these school children, sitting and waiting for 40 minutes for Trump to come back to the room?
Yeah.
No.
So maybe this actually happened, and he's trying to save a little bit of face of the brats. Anything is possible with Trump. Wow. Very important point that Mohammad mentioned. The way Ukrainian society is in total disaggregation, and the way that these oligarch-controlled neo-Nazi, Nazi, fascist, ultra-right-wing, whatever you want to call groups, from Pravi Sector to Azov Battalion, they're not going to give up. No way they're going to depose their weapons tomorrow and accept anything that Zelensky might be tempted to strike with. First of all, because Zelensky cannot do anything, because any concessions will be immediately interpreted by these Nazi fascist groups as betrayal, and Zelensky will get the proverbial Khmer Rouge bullet in the neck from behind. Everybody knows that. He's a hostage of these people. So let's think rationally in realpolitik terms. What would be the best outcome? Okay, he is illegal as president. The Rada is illegal as parliament. So presidential and parliamentary elections, serious, with international monitors everywhere. Then you have a relatively representative presidency and parliament. And then you start negotiating. Obviously, this is not going to happen. So even Trump joked with Zelensky. Wonderful! You suspended the election. I'm going to do the same thing here. Everybody knows that the whole thing is absurd, except, of course, the dwarves, the twats, the brats. Of course, for them, it's absolutely normal to have an illegal president and a legal parliament. After all, they are paying for all this, right? So this is the disaggregation on the Ukrainian side. The disaggregation on the American side is even more dangerous because Trump is fighting literally everybody. Silos inside the deep state, CIA, Pentagon, industrial military complex, think tanks, practically all of them. Mainstream media, practically all of them except Fox News. Public opinion, it's split. let's say a slight majority of public opinion in the US would like some sort of peace, but at least 40% don't, because they actually believe in everything that the Democrats were selling until 6 months ago, and the Europeans. And of course, because this is relayed by mainstream media nonstop, starting with New York Times, CNN, everything else. He's fighting the people who actually run the show in the US, because they would never accept something that, even if he tries to sell it as an escape route for the deep state, not for industrial military complex, because they will still be raking up profits in euros. Fabulous. But for the deep state, which is extremely Russophobe, any accommodation with Russia is anathema. And for a great deal of the big fortunes, big money, old money, aristocratic money, East Coast in the US, same thing. Not to mention the Atlanticist elites, 99% totally Russophobe, anti-Russia. And of course, the whole Brussels system, from NATO to the EU to the European Commission, everyone with no exceptions anti-Russia. So he has all of these sectors of the front line against him. He doesn't have a lot of support anywhere, in fact. It's very complicated. And he's been undermined even inside his own government. Little Marco Rubio is a ridiculous neocon. He has to follow his master's line, but up to a point. Very complicated. His negotiator with Ukraine, General Kellogg, doesn't even qualify as a joke. So it's very, very complicated, even inside his circle. So what are the only two vectors that he sees out of this whole drama? Number one, I want to get my Nobel Peace Prize. And we're not joking. He takes this very seriously, especially because this is a direct competition with Obama, which actually got a Nobel Peace Prize. And number two, I want to do business in Russia. And that's where he aligns with the American oligarchy, which in this case also aligned with the Russian oligarchy, who sometimes is very critical of Putin. So both oligarchies in the US and America agree, okay, let's go back to do business together. We could start with the Sakhalin-1 project, for instance. ExxonMobil had to leave because of sanctions. They lost, I think, over $4 billion, which they want to recoup. They want to go back. And the other participants of the consortium, it was an Indian company, if I'm not mistaken, and a Japanese company. They remained side by side with Rosneft. Only the Americans left. The Americans now want to go back. And they are already discussing this in Russia. This is something that we can see in the Vladivostok Forum, because Rosneft executives are going to be there. Will be my first question to any of them. All right, are you getting ExxonMobil back to Sakhalin-1 and other projects? So this is the interest of both oligarchies, right? Which brings us to Putin's internal problems. He simply cannot concede anything that escapes his own guidelines for having a solution in Ukraine, which he himself enunciated since June last year. So everybody in Russia knows about these guidelines, and everybody outside of Russia who, study that NATO out of Ukraine neutrality, even discussing NATO pushing back to its previous borders, restitution of the rights of Russophone speakers all across Ukraine, not only in Novorossiya or Donbass as a whole. Restitution of the frozen $300 billion, which were stolen by the Europeans. So the list is gigantic. I don't see anywhere, and Mohammad already said that there's no way to follow these guidelines. And there's no way Trump can sell these guidelines, not only to Kiev, but to the seven wars. Not to mention NATO. As much as his NATO policy, it's schizophrenic. No, I want us to lead from behind with NATO, but at the same time, the Europeans are going to be inside NATO fighting Russia. It's total schizophrenia. It's irreconcilable positions. But Trump cannot sign the death knell of NATO himself, as much as he cannot sign on the American strategic defeat in Ukraine. He has to, borrowing, I think the first one who used the analogy was our friend Ray McGovern. He's putting lipstick on a pig as much as possible to try to sell the peace agreement as an American initiative and extricate the U.S. from the second, the second or third or chapter of the mess, which will continue anyway. So, you know, for everybody, it's beyond a ultra high stakes game. And as Mohammad said, there's no easy way out. The US simply cannot close this chapter without admitting its strategic defeat. And if they do that, then that's the end of the empire, because nobody, even from Tierra del Fuego to Lombok in Indonesia, nobody will respect the empire anymore.
Yeah. Professor Marandi, do you see the capacity in the Trump administration to accept that, or somehow wrap it up in something else that would be somehow victorious on their part?
You know, something that Pepe said reminded me of a poll that recently came out. Remember, they had a recent poll about the most unpopular people in the United States, and we were focusing on Netanyahu and how unpopular he is now in the United States. Well, the second, if I recall correctly, and your viewers should correct me if I'm wrong, I think the second most popular person is Zelensky after the Pope. In any case, he still has favorable ratings in the United States. And this goes back to what Pepe was saying. I mean, we are very critical of Zelensky. We're not sympathetic because I think we've been looking into this much more carefully. You know, NATO lying, U.S. presidents lying, moving eastwards, then the coup in Kiev and all that. But the propaganda coming from the mainstream media and the alternative media that's really mainstream, because there is a new phenomenon in the United States and the West where you have these very influential alternative media outlets. They really aren't alternative, and they have a lot of influence. So they're basically the neocons online and the Zionists online. But in any case, Zelensky still has clout among ordinary Americans, according to these polls. And so, if Ukraine falls and Trump is seen as having pulled the plug, then he is going to take the blame too. So there will be those who say, yes, we should have brought an end to the war, but he was promising a peace deal. And if we see, for example, Odessa overrun, and I think that Pepe is absolutely correct, people have been discussing how and when Ukraine is going to fall for a couple of years now. And we all, I think, there was a consensus among people like ourselves that the Russians will win. Some were saying it's in a few months. Some were saying the timeline would be longer. But I think by now the consensus is that things are really, really bad for Ukraine, and that this is just not sustainable. Even Western mainstream media is acknowledging this. So Trump was supposed to give us a peace deal, and if literally months later Ukraine, the front lines collapse, Trump is going to be blamed for this. Mm-hmm. They're going to say, you caused this collapse. If you had stuck with your allies, it would have been different. And if you had imposed, what happened to that peace deal? Why were you unable to impose a peace deal? That is going to come back to haunt him. And then I don't know if I haven't seen the book, but there's a new book that's come out on Prince Andrew of the UK. And there's an online version, by the way, and the printed version. And there's a sentence in the printed version that they removed from the online version. This is my understanding. I haven't seen either. About Melania and about her relationship with Epstein. I don't want to go into this on this show because it's, I don't, the language. But anyway, it's said that she had a relationship with him and then later with Trump. The Epstein situation is going to get worse and worse. This is not going to go away. And the genocide in Gaza, and of course the trade war, and all these none of these are going to go well for Trump. None of these are going to end. The only thing he had going, or he potentially has going for him, is the relationship with Russia. So the imagery is excellent. I mean, I dislike Trump, but you have to admit that it looked good for him. It may not have looked good for the United States because it was a defeat for the United. When Russia wins, that means the West lost. But for him, I think it was positive because he presented himself as the peacemaker. Now we have our views about whether he's a peacemaker or not, but that's beyond the point. But if after this we see the Russians continue to push forward, and the Europeans continue to pay for weapons with money they don't have, and to get those weapons that don't exist, and the Ukrainian lines continue to collapse, and then you see city after city fall, and perhaps Odessa, that is not going to make Trump look at those images of Trump and Putin will be looked at very differently in a few months from now than they are now. Now the Trump supporters see this as a sign of his strength and his ability to bring an end to the war. But if he's unable to do so and Ukraine collapses, and as I said, Zelensky is still seen as somewhat favorable, then that means Trump has failed. And that goes back to what Pepe and I were both saying earlier. This is going to be catastrophic for Trump.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pepe, it seems the momentum that Professor Marandi is talking about is so important. I don't know if there is some sort of understanding among the people in the administration about it.
Considering that the people in administration, the mediocrity rules, I'm not sure they understand. And especially you have, okay, to a certain extent, fifth columnists like Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio is playing a neocon game. He's inside the administration, but he remains a neocon. Very complicated. The people who basically convinced Trump to launch the tariff war against China, very mediocre as well. So if we complain about Blinken and Sullivan, the previous administration, wow, what we're getting now, it's as mediocre as before. That's hardcore. But one thing that they are, it's not a question of doing right, but one thing where they seem to get some momentum is this overall war against BRICS, because they all are into it. And especially the war against the top BRICS, Russia, China, India, Brazil, and Iran. No question about that. There are different layers of the hybrid war. In the case of Iran, I think it's the most critical case because it's a hybrid war that became hot and can become hot again anytime. And of course, it's a war that has been going on for over 40 years. The case of China is essentially only a tariff war, at least for now. Of course, there is the technological war. But the Americans look at China technologically, and when they look at what China achieved, especially since they launched Made in China 2025, only 10 years ago, they fulfilled what 70 to 80% of what they wanted to do 10 years ago. It's mind-boggling. So they don't underestimate China technologically. And in terms of Russia, the fact that Alaska happened, they were forced to recognize that Russia is a peer power. This is the big, big, big geopolitical victory for Putin personally and for the new Russia, let's put it this way. Fourth largest economy in the world by PPP, no crisis, a solid society with projects of national interest like development of the Arctic and the Russian Far East. The geopolitically, we can say that it's the most important member of BRICS in terms of articulations everywhere. China is the geoeconomic superpower of BRICS. Russia is the geopolitical superpower of BRICS, essentially. The strategic relationships between Russia, China, and Iran, and in the case of Iran, Iran and India, also very, very important, and Iran and Russia. All those are masterful displays of Russian power these past few years. And of course, their resilience in the war of the collective West against them. The collective West threw everything they had against Russia. The Russians absorbed it. And look where we are now, on the verge of a massive strategic victory against the collective West. So all of that is Russia as a peer superpower. And the Americans had to recognize it. Although obviously the deep state would never recognize it. But Trump was, in this particular case, smart enough to recognize it, but in a very Trumpian way. Okay, I recognize it, but I want to profit from it. I want to get my piece of the pie, which, once again, we go back to American oligarchs doing business with Russian oligarchs again. This is very, very important subtext of the whole thing, you know. But the war against BRICS, let's say that Putin got a respite in Alaska in terms of no new sanctions on buyers of Russian energy. This is, for the moment, very, very important. But the different levels of hybrid war against, especially these top 5 BRICS, will continue and will get much worse. And in the case of Iran, we should be very, very worried, all of us. It can get much, much worse. By the way, I have a question for you, Mohammad, if you can, even briefly. What is this Iranian idea of now a corridor between the Persian Gulf and the Black Sea as competition with the Zangezur American Trump-owned corridor?
Yeah.
Can you?
You read my mind, Pepe.
Okay, so I read your mind, Nima. So
Go ahead.
The ball is in your court, Mohammad. Explain to us this new Iranian deal.
Well, I think that just before I begin, I do want to point out that, and this is something that I'm sure you've discussed on the show before, and Pepe has said this too, but it is significant, again, just as a reminder, that everyone has been saying that the weakest links in BRICS is India and Brazil. And it's quite ironic that Trump targeted these two countries in the latest round in his antagonization of Russia. And of course, there are those who say that one incentive that he had to speak with Putin was because he thought that if he had to impose the tariffs on India in particular, and perhaps on China and Brazil too, that it would have been catastrophic for the United States. That may be the case, although I'm not quite sure if Trump really is that farsighted. But but it is interesting that BRICS, what Trump has done is that he has both enhanced Putin. As I said, the biggest winner in this was Putin. There's no doubt, and Russia. And as Pepe said, the stature of Russia goes up, and that means the stature of BRICS goes up. And then you have to sort of keep in mind the picture of the 7 brats and Trump. The West goes down, Russia goes up, and that means BRICS goes up. And then India and Brazil are have tilted closer towards BRICS. Now, I don't know how long this will last or how deep it goes, but my Indian colleague that in our panel, I asked him today, and he said that in any case, this brings about a change in India because they're no longer going to trust the United States. They've been cultivating a good relationship with the United States, and this has caused irreversible damage. Now, again, these sanctions may not be imposed, and then the relationship between India and the United States goes sort of back to normal, but something did happen that won't be forgotten. So I think that BRICS comes out stronger. How stronger, that depends on Trump and Putin and the relationship and whether Trump imposes those sanctions or those tariffs, which are sanctions. With regards to the corridor, I haven't read anything about it, but my understanding, my interpretation is that Iran wants to put pressure on the Republic of Azerbaijan. You know, many Iranians believe that the Republic of Azerbaijan belongs to Iran. And, you know, Ayatollah Khamenei, his name is, Khamenei is an Azeri city. Khamenei means from Khamen, from that city. And he is a fluent Azeri speaker. He's actually he's very much into literature, both Persian and Azeri. He's also into European literature, but in any case, that's a different story. So he is Azeri. Marandi, my own family name, Marand is a city near Tabriz in Azerbaijan, in Iranian Azerbaijan. Marandi means from Marand. The president is from Tabriz. So the Republic of Azerbaijan, there are less Azeri speakers in the Republic of Azerbaijan than there are in Iran.
In Iran.
And far less. And many in Iran dislike, of course, the leader in the Republic of Azerbaijan. And the fact that he is collaborating with the Israeli regime against Iran, and Erdogan, who's been using takfiris, Wahhabis, ISIS, Al Qaeda, and for Iranians, ISIS and Al Qaeda are as bad as it can get because they are the sort of people who, if they could get their hands on, they can get, they kill us. They see us as non-Muslim, and they would kill people in Iran. So they view, and then of course we had the 12-day war, and there's a strong belief in Iran among ordinary Iranians that Aliyev assisted the Israeli regime.
Yeah.
And you have Azeris who on television said, we saw drones flying over from the Republic of Azerbaijan over our airspace. People, Iranian Azeris who were just across the border, they said they saw it. So there's a lot of hostility to, or at least there's a lot of unhappiness, to say the least, about Aliyev and the Republic of Azerbaijan and Iran. And so the Iranians have also, so this is on the one hand. On the other hand, the Iranians have said already that if Armenian sovereignty is violated in any way or form, that will mean war. And they said that if anyone impedes Iran's access to Armenia and beyond, then we'll fight. They've said that. So combine these two, and that is the Iranians want to develop a corridor saying, look, we don't need you, Azerbaijan, you, Mr. Aliyev. We can have our own. That, I think, is one thing. The second is, of course, it is through building this corridor, they're basically saying if anyone blocks our corridor, then that means that they're confronting us. So I think it's two things at the same time. And also, we have to keep in mind that the relationship between Aliyev and Russia is not very good. We've seen the Russians carry out strikes on his assets in Ukraine, and the arrest of a lot of the people affiliated to the underworld in Russia who are who are originally from the Republic of Azerbaijan. So I think that Iran is using this opportunity to put extra pressure. And I've also heard, and I don't know if this is 100, I don't know if this is true, but I've heard, because I've been busy over the last few days, especially with this trip and all, but I've heard that the Iranians stopped because the corridor between the two sides of Azerbaijan the corridor is in Iran right now. And I've heard, and I may be wrong, that Iran, at least for a period, they blocked it. And they said, well, go and use your, they said, like, go and use your corridor. That's something that so the Iranians have a lot of leverage right now. And with the Russians being so unhappy, I think this is the Iranians are putting a lot of pressure on both Aliyev, but also they're also strengthening their hand in Armenia.
Yeah. Pepe, how does Russia see what's going on there? And do you feel that Russia is somehow, do they have any sort of grand strategy for the South Caucasus?
Apparently not. This is one of the things I would like to discuss in Vladivostok, less than two weeks from now, in fact. We haven't heard anything specific from Moscow about the Zangezur, apart the usual diplomatic niceties. It's good that Armenia and Azerbaijan have peace, and it's not peace, especially when the Americans interfere directly. But for the moment, the Russians are keeping their cards very close to their chest, and they are not saying anything. I'm sure there's a lot of undercurrent movements, no question about that. But this is something you only know about these things when you are in Russia and we're talking to Russians in Russia. So I prefer to wait 2 weeks. And then we can come back to the subject because it's absolutely essential. What you can read in some Russian military channels, for instance, people are pissed to death. Another Russian disaster, diplomatic disaster. I think it's too considering the explanation that Mohammad just gave us, which is very comprehensive explanation. It's I think we are in the beginning of the whole thing. This is an extremely sophisticated game, and we have too many players: Iran, Russia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey, and
Israel.
And Israel and the US. So we have 7 major players involved. It's immensely complicated. Right?
Yeah. In my opinion, Azerbaijan can simply turn into a new Georgia or Ukraine to some extent, because if they go the way that as Professor Marandi mentioned, there is nothing good going on between Azerbaijan and Russia as well.
You know what the short definition of Azerbaijan? It's a mix of Tony Soprano and the oil mafia. Tony Soprano will be the Aliyev family, and the oil mafia is BP. These two control everything in Azerbaijan. It's nasty. It's very, very nasty.
Yeah, and they're involved in Ukraine as well.
Of course. Caucasus is their state oil company. They have terminals in Odessa. That's very, very serious. Yeah.
Someone told me last night, and I don't know how correct this is, but they said that the Russians in their strikes caused $300 million in damages.
Wow, if that's true, it's enormous. It gives an idea of the full spectrum of direct collaboration.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. I think we can wrap it up right now. And great pleasure.
No, I am in front of the 2 coolest Persians in the world, and I want more time.
And I'm with the two coolest Brazilians.
Thank you
Mohammed,
so much.
have you,
Go
okay,
ahead.
just 30 seconds. I'm very curious.
Go ahead. Please.
Have you discussed anything specific with your colleagues about the SCO in Tianjin? In terms of the SCO getting a BRICS-like push from now on?
Yeah, actually, I think it was ironically, one of the Chinese who was saying that the stature of the SCO is rising and it's becoming increasingly important. And it was an Indian colleague who was complaining that the SCO doesn't have the sort of teeth that it needs to become more effective. So
Yeah.
I felt that the mood was that the SCO is they were complaining that it's the leaders there, it's just they talk and there's not enough
Not enough.
push to take it to the next level. But it did seem to me, from what I was hearing among with these colleagues, that they do want the SCO to go up a notch. And even though there are limits to how far the SCO can go, I mean, the structure itself makes it difficult for it to go beyond a particular point. But I actually mentioned this in my own discussion. I said, the European Union, one reason why it came into being was that because after the Second World War, I mean, the Europeans were always killing each other. They were always at war. That's why you have so many small countries with all these different languages. And ultimately this what led to the EU coming into being created and then expanding was the need to keep the peace in Europe partially. But they went too far in that these countries lost their sovereignty and they no longer controlled their own economic policies, their own political, they lost sovereignty, and Brussels became the center of power, even though they're unelected bureaucrats. So in a sense, I was saying tonight before I came here that the SCO shouldn't in fact go too far, because, and I don't think it can, because it's a very different environment. The circumstances are completely different. But to a degree, the very fact that it has this structure is a good thing. And so, and when the meeting happens, one thing that I probably will tweet is putting aside the picture of the seven dwarfs and a picture of the leaders of the SCO sitting together at a table.
The round table. Yeah.
Exactly. So I do think, from my understanding, there is a strong incentive to take the SCO to a higher level. But again, it's going to be very difficult because India has one agenda, China has another, the Russians have their own agenda, the Iranians too. But I think, and another thing that was discussed today was that the SCO should also move beyond security.
Exactly.
And deal with economic issues. And one reason why it's being held here in Tianjin, because as you know, it has a very important, there's a very important port here, and that's where the discussion was held, was to stress on the economic importance of the SCO meeting. In other words, being in Tianjin was symbolic of there being connectivity, economic connectivity, alongside security.
Is Pezeshkian going, Mohammad?
Sorry?
Is Pezeshkian going to Tianjin?
Yes, he is. Not only is he planning to be here, but he is staying on for the parade.
Excellent. So we're going to have them on the same table, Mohammad and Nima. This is very, very important. Putin, Xi, Pezeshkian, and Modi. This is huge.
Yeah.
Maybe this is the year of the SCO. Like the last year was the year that BRICS taking off. Maybe this could be the year of the SCO.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Professor Marandi and Pepe. Great
Thank
pleasure
you
as
both,
always.
guys. You rock.
Great speaking to you both.
See you.
Cheers.